In today's episode, I want to take you on a short journey which I believe will help you to connect with the deepest sense of who you are in Christ Jesus. So, what you believe about you can be better aligned with what God has declared for you to walk in terms of everyday victory. Now, this is the first of a three-part series on priceless principles every smart kingdom citizen ought to know about their identity in Christ. I want to start our discussion from a simple principle. That principle says that who you believe you are deep down inside will eventually drive what you do. And whatever identity you embrace most will essentially shape the course of your life. The world today is filled with people who are frustrated and on the wrong paths because they simply have no sense of who they are. They have not connected with an identity that helps them to define who they're born to become, what they're created to achieve, and what they can have and receive in both this life and the one to come. My assignment today is simply to help you to better understand your identity in Christ so that you can live the abundant and the blessed life that Jesus said he came to bring us in John chapter 10 and 10. Let's get started with the question, who do you think you are? The Ugly Duckling, a fairy tale written by Danish poet and author Hans Christian Andersen, is perhaps one of my most favorite simple stories about someone being mistaken and confused about their true identity. When the story begins, on a snug retreat sat a mother duck on a nest watching for her young brood of eggs to hatch. One by one, all the eggs hatch, and beautiful, fluffy, golden ducklings emerge. All the eggs hatch except one. The last egg is quite peculiar and is rather larger than the others, but the mother duck thinks nothing of it. Finally, the last egg hatch, and out comes something that is a bird, but it does not look quite like the other beautiful ducklings. The story goes that this little unusual bird is perceived by the other birds and the animals on the farm as a homely little creature, and it suffers much verbal and physical abuse from them. He wanders sadly from the barnyard and he lives with wild ducks and geese until hunters slaughter the flock. He finds a home with the old woman, but her cat and her hen tease him mercilessly, and again he sets off on his own. He sees a flock of migrating wild swans. He is delighted and excited, but he cannot join them for he is too young and he cannot fly. Winter arrives. A farmer finds and carries the freezing little bird home. But the fondling is frightened by the farmer's noisy children and he flees the house. He spends a miserable winter alone in the outdoors, mostly hiding in a cave on the lake that partly freezes over. When spring arrives, a flock of swans descend on the now thawing lake. The ugly duckling, now having fully grown and matured, unable to endure a life of solitude and hardship anymore, he decides to throw himself at the flock of swans, deciding that it is better to be killed by such beautiful birds than to live a life of ugliness and misery. He is shocked when the swans welcome and accept him, only to realize by looking at his reflection in the water that he has grown into one of them. The flock takes to the air, and the ugly duckling spreads his beautiful large wings and he takes flight with the rest of his new family. You know, this story makes me think about something interesting that I want you to note. Just like the ugly duckling, or the confused swan rather, we too are born in an imperfect environment. David said in Psalms 51 and 5, he said, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me." This experience of being born in an imperfect environment has left many believing that they too are worthless, that they're no good, they're useless, and that God will never truly accept them. But the reality is that God has always known that he never created you as an ugly duckling, but rather your true nature is that of a beautiful swan. All he wants you to do is to accept and embrace your new identity in Christ, and your life will be totally transformed because your perspective has changed. So here's an important question. Who are you? Seriously, take a minute and answer that question. I promise it will be the most important one you are asked today. Now, if you're like most people, you probably used your job title, your academic achievements, or some other designation which describes what you do to create an identity for yourself, right? And that's okay. But here is why this question is so critical. Your identity determines your activity. Teachers teach, preachers preach, singers sing, dancers dance. So a simple principle rings true. Who you believe you are will drive what you do. And whatever identity you embrace most will essentially shape the course of your life. What you believe most about you will shape what you do, how you live, and what you receive in your life. So I ask you again, who are you? When you introduce yourself to people, what do you say about yourself? What topics do you most naturally talk about when the conversation is focused on you? What do you tell them that you are into? The dictionary defines identity as the condition of being oneself and not another. The condition or the character as to who a person is, or the exact likeness in nature or qualities. When I read the last definition, which said the exact likeness in nature or qualities, I got excited because I realized that identity is never manufactured from thin air. It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Rather, identity is passed down or inherited. In order to have an exact likeness to something means that an original must exist so that the copy can be compared to something, right? So here's an example. If I say that a son bears the exact likeness of his father, or he shares the nature or qualities of his father, it implies that the son has inherited his identity from his father, right? If I say that this statue is an exact replica or likeness of another statue, which implies that the statue is created in the exact image of the original, that's right. So the son inherits his identity from his father, and the statue gets its exact likeness from the original. Here is what that means for you and me. When we go back to the origins of our faith, the Bible's book of beginnings, we find something significant in connection with our identity. Genesis 1 and 26 to 27 says, Then God said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. Now, that is powerful and profound because that implies that you and me, we derive our identity from God himself. That means that we have inherited the very nature and the qualities of God. And everything that God is, such as love, joy, wisdom, light, etc., exists within us as regenerated beings born in Christ Jesus. Now, this brings up another important question that you probably have, which is, since the life of Christ is in me, I should live and act as Christ, but yet I struggle daily with my faults, my issues, and my shortcomings. So how can the nature and qualities of God be in me and I don't look and act just like Christ? You know, this has been a challenge for many believers for quite a long time, and the problem exists because of their perspective. You see, many focus on what they are not doing or what they should not be doing as the benchmark for determining if they are walking after Christ. But God focuses on something quite different. God isn't focused on what you do. He is more focused on who you are becoming. The Apostle Paul made a simple statement which bears and speaks to this point in 1 Corinthians 13 and 11 when he said, When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put aside childish things. A child will do childish things, but as he learns, as he grows and matures into manhood, he replaces his childish actions with adult behaviors. As his nature changes and he becomes more disciplined as an individual, so too does his actions. This is why God is more concerned about who you are becoming rather than what you are currently doing or not doing. God knows that as you mature, just like the ugly duckling, one day you will find that the grace, beauty, and splendor of God within you will be visible to all. You were always a swan, but now everyone will be able to see it. Before we move into the identity confessions of who you are in Christ, let's start discussing the 5 things that you are not. In John chapter 10 and 10, Jesus makes a contrast between himself as the giver of life and abundance and the thief whose only goal is to take away life. He said, "The thief only comes to steal and to kill and to destroy, but I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance." As you connect with your true identity in Christ, you must always be mindful of the thief that wants to rob you of all God says that you can be, do, and have. More importantly, you've got to be careful of who you listen to and whom you take advice from. Aesop, in his fable stories, tells a narrative about a crow and a fox. A crow is sitting in a tree with a piece of cheese in its beak. A passing fox would like to eat the cheese, and it tries to persuade and then trick the crow to bring the cheese down or to drop it. The crow doesn't fall for this. So the fox tries flattery instead. The fox tells the crow how lovely his feathers are and how fine looking his head is. Then the fox says how much he would love to hear the crow sing. Tricked by the flattery, the crow opens his beak to sing, dropping the cheese to the ground where the fox gobbles it up. This reminds me of a similar story in the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis chapter 3. The serpent, or the devil, hating the fact that mankind is created in the image and the likeness of God and shares a beautiful relationship with God, he comes and he meets with the man, and God talks and walks with the man in the cool of the evening every day. God works through the man in the garden. The serpent is upset at this, or the devil, and he now tries to work his deception to disrupt this close union and fellowship. He approaches the woman and he says, "Did God really say that you can't eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman says to the serpent, "We may eat the fruit from all of the trees in the garden, but about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, you must not eat it or touch it, or you will die." "No, you will not die," the serpent said to the woman. "In fact, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." And as they say, the rest is history. So you must be careful of who you are listening to. I want to walk you through a few powerful things that God said about your identity and who you are. But before we jump deeper into that, let's expose some misinformation which you should never accept about you. Let's talk about who you are not. So here are 2 things that you are not. 1, you are not who the world says you are. The world, which refers to the evil system which is against God, has an opinion of you, and it is never good. Jesus said in John 15 and 18 to 19 that if the world hates you, understand it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. However, because you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world hates you. So you are not who the world says you are. You can never connect with your true identity based on the world's opinion, because everything the world says about you comes from a place of hatred. So it is always lies. The next is that you are not who you have often told yourself that you are. In Judges chapter 6, the angel of the Lord walks up to Gideon, who is hiding in a vine press, threshing wheat, and calls out to him, "Gideon, mighty man of valor." But instead of being excited about this, Gideon struggles with this new identity because all of his life he told himself that he was worthless and nothing good could ever come out of his life. His background had taught him that his family was the weakest tribe in the nation of Israel. His father's house was the poorest family in that tribe, and he was the least significant person within his father's house. And because this was the identity he claimed for himself, he lived defeated until God changed his identity. Wherever you have come from in your life, you cannot trust who you have told yourself you are. You can only trust who God says that you are. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this inspirational session and that it added value to you. If this episode has been a blessing to you and you want to download it or to share it to be a blessing to your friends or to grab the other free resources we have available for you, visit us at purposeunleashed.com/principles podcast. Again, that's purposeunleashed.com/principles podcast. Have a great day.